Hi everyone, I'm Paulette Morrissey from Tulip Square, and today I'm going to show you how to do raw edge applique. This is a way of doing applique that is not real intimidating. You don't need to have little extra seam allowances to turn under. There's no needle turned applique or anything. It's just cut pieces, sew them down, iron them down with an interfacing, and sew around the edges. It couldn't be easier. I'm going to show you how to do the technique on this cute little gnome guy. So we're going to do him, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to do. So let's head over to the sewing machine and get started. All right, so with basically any applique you're going to do, you're going to need the design printed on paper so you can trace it onto a fusible and iron it to the back of your fabric. So I've got the pieces that I need right here, and this is the little character I'm going to show you for this demonstration. It's just a simple little gnome, but this technique that I'm showing you will work with any kind of applique you want to do. It's called raw edge because you're going to use the raw edges and sew around the edges of your raw edges. You're not going to turn under any edges or finish them or anything. It's just called raw edge because you use an interfacing that adheres to the fabric. It can even be washable. So first of all, print out the page you need for your pieces, and you're going to trace this onto interfacing. So I've got a piece of interfacing here, and this is the paper side, and this is the fusible side. You can see it's shiny and it's got a little bit of a texture to it. So I'm going to put it paper side up right over my page of designs of pieces, and I'm just going to trace them like so. And if you want to modify them a little bit, like if I didn't want his beard so long or whatever, I could trace it like that and change it. And you can write right on here that it's a beard. It doesn't matter if you're not sure of something. And you're going to trace all your pieces. So that's all the pieces we need. Oops, and his nose. We forgot his nose. Yep, his nose. Can't have a gnome without a gnome nose. There we go. All right, so you've got all your pieces traced like that. Then what you've got to do is rough cut them out, just like this. Okay, I'm going to cut them out fairly roughly so that I can still cut them out neatly once they're on the fabrics. There, I've got all those pieces done, and now we're going to take this over to the ironing board, and I'm going to show you what we do next. So now I'm at my ironing board, and I'm going to iron these pieces onto the backs of the fabrics I want to use. So I'm going to use this funky piece for his beard, and I'm just going to iron this onto the back. Be sure you use a dry iron and use the heat setting according to the kind of fusible you're using. And give it a good, whatever your pattern, your directions say to use. I'm not sure what this one is, but Heat and Bond Light, I think. That's on there. And then I think I'm going to use, this is going to be a little autumny looking gnome. It's going to have, this is going to be his body. So I'm going to iron his little fat body right there. Now see how this would go right off onto the fabric? I'm going to cut that close because, I mean, it's going to go right off the fabric. I don't want it to do that because it will go right on the ironing board. We're going to go right there. That is some nasty stuff to get off your ironing board. Trust me, I know these things. And then you cut out these pieces. Get that out of the way. I'm just going to cut these out. When you trace these pieces onto your paper, if you would trace them opposite, like flip the paper over and trace them through a window or something where you can see them yet, you could make the same pieces only reversed. So you could make the whole little gnome or whatever you're working, you could make them a left one and a right one. Okay, all right, I got this nice piece for the background. So what I'm going to do is remove this paper backing. What you do is if you fold a piece towards the paper, not towards the front, but towards the paper will fold, but the fabric won't. So then you can just peel this off. And you can see that it's shiny because that's got the stuff that's going to stick down. So you can just peel off all these. But remember, if you fold it this way, it's not going to work so good. You have to fold it towards the paper because then the paper can have a sharp fold. And then it separates from the fabric, and then you can just peel it off. Works on all the pieces just like that. I'm just going to get all these pieces removed. And if you find a piece that for some reason you're not seeing the shiny back on the fabric, just put it down and iron it again. It means you didn't quite get it adhered down well enough. You can do these applique technique. You can use it with real simple designs like this. You can use it with much more complex designs. You can use them for parts of quilt squares. You can use them on placemats. You can use them for you can make fancy wall hangings. Sky's the limit. Okay, now I've got all my little pieces here. So what I like to do is iron them all down first. So I'm going to figure out where I want them. Here's the gnome, his little body. And here's his beard. And his hat goes up here. Whoops, I guess I gotta move him down a little bit. His hat goes here. Move up a little bit. I have no idea what this piece is going to be, but he has to be centered a little bit there. And then this is going to go right here. Interesting looking gnome, isn't he? He's like a forest gnome. Got his little nose right there. And then we got a couple stripes on his hat. Here's a stripe. And there's a stripe. And then his little top. Just like so. Pretty darn easy. And then I'm just going to tap down right away without pressing hard. I just want to make everybody in place. And now I'm going to hold it down for a second. And this will depend on what your brand of interfacing tells you to do. I believe this one says hold it for like 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to start by appliquing around the outside edge of the body of the little gnome. I'm using a buttonhole stitch, and I'm making sure that my outside edge stitch does not hit the applique and the inside stitch does, because you don't want to hit right along the edge of the applique piece because it will fray the fabric. When you get to corners, turn gradually and make sure you're always turning when your needle is on the right side or the outside of the applique piece. Otherwise you'll leave gaps in your stitching. Just take your time going around corners and make sure that when you stop to turn, you're doing it with the needle on the outside, just like this. And then continue around. And when I get to his beard here, I'm just going to stop and skip over the beard because I will do that all in one stitch seam. So I'm going to stop, just pick up the needle, go past it for now, and continue down. And you should always take your time when you're appliquing. It's easy to make mistakes, and it's kind of a pain to rip them out. Also make sure you're not pulling and stretching on your fabric to distort it. Turn it gently and turn it when the needle is up. Otherwise you might end up twisting it and then your background will get a little puckered. And I'm just going to come up here to the top, and this is just a simple buttonhole stitch, a pretty basic stitch on most sewing machines. Then I'm going to stop here. One more little backup stitch. I'm going to cut the thread. Okay, now I'm going to do just a plain zigzag stitch around his beard. I'm only going to go around the bottom of his beard. I'm not going to do the top edge, and I'm not going to do the part below his nose, because those two pieces will get done when I do those sections, when I do the top of his hat and when I do his nose. I'll do those. So what I'm doing is doing the applique in the order that the layers were put down and ironed in place. Now as I go around the corners, I'm making sure that I keep my needle on the outside of the applique when I turn. And when you get into these tight areas, just do a lot of turning. Make sure you do it when your needle is on the outside and up. Your foot is up, so you're not distorting your background fabric. And just take your time. You can do really tiny pieces as long as you take your time. Do a little jiggling back and forth on his little beard here. And a zigzag stitch looks good on his beard because it makes his beard look a little scruffier around the edges. And he is a gnome, so he should have a scruffy beard, I would guess. So I'm just going along, taking my time. You could use a bigger zigzag stitch here or a smaller one, or you could use different widths of zigzag stitches on different parts of a picture just for variation. You can do a back tack stitch here, or if you have a fixing stitch, I'm not sure what the heck mine is called, it's an end stitch or something, but it just does 3 or 4 stitches in the same spot. So, okay, now that is zigzag, and then that is the buttonhole stitch, and you can see the difference. And then I'm going to continue on. I think the next thing I will do is that brim of his hat will be next, and I think I'll go back to the buttonhole stitch, and I'm going to start it right by his side of his nose and go around to the other side of his nose. Because the nose is on top of the hat, I will do that stitching on top of the hat stitching. I've gone back to the buttonhole stitch for the brim of the hat. I believe the buttonhole stitch is probably my favorite for applique. I like how you can vary it from pretty large to pretty small, wide and narrow, and the length and the width, obviously. You can also use some of the decorative stitches on your sewing machine if you've got them. Just make sure that they're uniform and that they're not too wide, that they won't go around curves and corners. Try them sewing them a little bit on just scrap fabric to see how they handle going around corners and curves, because some are not suited for changing the shape and some are fine. Now this time I'm just going to go around the outside edge of this hat, and I'm going to stop when I get to the other side of his nose. And I'm just continuing around his hat, making sure that I stop on the outside of the stitching to the right of the applique pieces when I turn a corner. Slow down when you get to corners and curves. Take your time. Remember not to pull and tug on the background fabric. You don't want to distort it. And I'm just going to finish up and stop when I get to his nose. Okay, now I'm going to go around his nose, and I'm going to use the buttonhole stitch again, but I've made it a little bit smaller. And also, I don't know if you can tell in the picture, but what I did is I didn't like how transparent the nose was on top of the brim of his hat, so I cut out a second nose and ironed it on top of the first nose, which works fine, except I should have cut it a little tiny bit bigger than the first one, and I didn't. I cut it almost a little bit smaller, so a little bit of the edge of his first nose is showing through. So if you see little bits of it looks like I didn't catch the edge of the nose. It's really the underside of the nose, or the first layer of nose. And I will trim that off in a little bit. Once I get his whole nose sewn down, I'll trim that off later when I've got the little gnome done. But there's just a little bit of it stuck hanging out underneath the stitching. But if you're going to add an extra layer, if you don't like how transparent something is, just make sure you cut it at least as big as the original piece, or a tiny, tiny bit bigger. So I'm coming around to the end of his nose. And also doing the stitching in black, his nose is a lot more visible than it was on his beard when it was just there and they're both light colored. There, I got his nose done. Get all that trimming done. Snip off that little bit of extra nose he didn't need there from the first layer of nose. That'll be fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and start sewing down on the hat. I'm going to go sew up one side, and this is also, I'm using the buttonhole stitch, and I've made it a little bit bigger than the stitch that I used on his nose. So I'm going to go up one side. I'm going to not do the little trim on the top of the hat because I'll do that separately afterwards. So I'm just going to stop, raise the needle, skip over the little top trim, and come down the other side. Goes a little bit faster when you're going down the straight edges, but still make sure you're keeping your stitches in line. And back tack a stitch or two at the end. Trim all your little threads. I'll catch all the back threads later. And now I'm going to do both edges of the stripes on his hat. And I think I'm just going to keep continuing with the same buttonhole stitch. But remember, you can use a lot of different stitches. You can use, this would be a good place to put some decorative stitches. It would be kind of cute. Now I'm going to sew the stripes on his hat down, and I'm just going to use a straight stitch, and I'm going really close to the edge, maybe about a 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of the stripe. And as close as I can comfortably get it without going off the edge. And then when I get to the end, I'm just going to skip and turn around and go down the other side of the stripe. Just make sure you stay on your stripe. And if you go a little further off the edge than I am, I mean a little further in, it might fray a little bit if it's washed, but on a hat it would look kind of cute if it's got little fuzzy stripes, so I wouldn't worry about that. But I'm trying to stay kind of close. And these other little thread ends I will cut off once I get all the stripes done. It's coming around this side, and that's the last one of those. A little stitch or two to hold it in place. I'm going to snip off all of these threads, all these little connecting pieces. Don't you just love threads, pieces everywhere? Drive you crazy. They drive me crazy. But a lot of things drive me crazy, so that's okay. And then, okay. Now we have to do the little thing on the top of his hat. And I think I'm going to do a zigzag stitch on that. Again, go back to a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to use a bigger, looser zigzag stitch just because it's a fluffy little thing on the top of his hat. Okay, so I'm going around, and I'm not going to be real careful about where I hit the edges or not, and I'm actually going to go a little bit beyond the edges just so it's a little more ragged looking a little bit. So actually this little top thing, if you were doing a different stitch, it wouldn't even have to be this shape. It could just be round, and you could go around it with a big loose zigzag stitch or some other loose stitch. But since this was the one I put in the pattern, this is the one I will use. This gnome is part of our free applique patterns on our website. So if you happen to like gnomes, we've got a good selection of them on the website. I think we've got ones for Easter and, I don't know, summer, different things. There's probably 5 or 6 different sets of gnomes on there, and they're all free. We've got a library of 365 different applique patterns on there that are all free. You just download them as PDFs. And gnomes are kind of popular right now, so we did add quite a few gnomes. So I'm just going to finish up with this. This also, I could have done this in a different color, even the thread, but I didn't think of it till just now. Could have done it with like some yellow or something, like from the color on the little fluffy piece. It would be kind of cute, or the orange from the stripes. Got to learn to think of these things in advance, I guess. Think. But you see I'm going off the edges a little bit and going beyond the corners and just making it a little goofy. Get this about done here. And there is his little fluffy hat. Snip all these little threads, and I believe our little gnome is all done. So that shows you just how easy applique is done when you're doing raw edge applique on a sewing machine. It's pretty easy, isn't it? And here I just wanted to show you a little bit of some variations you can think of using. I put a felt beard on this one, and it's not even actually attached. It's connected by his hat and his nose, and then I added some flower buttons on top instead of the sewn down little hat trim. And you could put some little buttons around him or some beads and embellish him with all kinds of trim wherever you want. You could have extra sequins or whatever. You could go crazy, especially if it's not going to go in the wash. If you're going to do stuff like that, you're going to have to not have it be going in the wash. It would be for a pillow or a wall hanging or something like that. Okay, so that was just a quick little intro to raw edge applique, and you can see how easy it is to make something like this or any basic applique. And you can get more fancy with them. You can use more intricate ones, and it's all the same technique. You're just layering the pieces and sewing around the edges. It's basically all there is to it. And you can use your scraps. It's a great way to practice. Use some scraps up, and it's no big loss if it doesn't turn out, obviously. You can use different kind of threads. You can use different colors of thread. You can use different stitches. The blanket stitch, the buttonhole stitch, zigzag stitch, some of the narrow, cute little embroidery stitches and things that are in a lot of sewing machines nowadays. You can use some of those. If you add things like this little guy where I added the felt beard, remember he can't go in the washing machine then because he's got a felt beard, and that button's kind of big and obnoxious. But if you're just making wall hangings or things that aren't really going to go in the wash, don't be afraid to embellish, but add beads, add buttons, have all kinds of fun. And that is basically your intro to applique. And I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and if there's certain videos that you need to see or you want to see some of our specific patterns made into videos, please let us know. We've got a long list of patterns and videos that I'm going to make, and we can shuffle the order around if we need to. So go do some sewing and have a good day. We'll see you again soon.